A destroyer of worlds, a friendly neighborhood hero, good versus evil, and all from the single mind of a comic book pioneer. Passed away at the age of 95, Stan Lee has left a long legacy behind him, and one that goes well beyond the recent years of cameo appearances in the MCU. For the casual fan, Lee is simply known as the creator of Marvel Comics, but his history is long, complicated, and filled with more twists and turns than the comics he wrote for. His controversy with the creation of certain Marvel heroes and the legacy he will leave behind. Take a journey with us as we explore the true story of Stan Lee. What do you think of when you hear the name Stan Lee? For many, it'll conjure up an image of the old Stan Lee, a man mostly used for appearances and representative of Marvel's long history. Even at 95 years old, he had a coolness factor about him, the kind of guy you'd wait in line at a comic convention for, one of the only guys you'd want to sign the front of a classic Marvel comic, the man you say, aha, to when his cameo scene appears in a Marvel movie. But the real Stan Lee is more than just a novelty. He was a pioneer, a visionist, and the face of Marvel. Like any face of a giant company, Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, Lee has faced his fair share of challenges and debates over the years. To remain the face of Marvel in almost a revisionist history where many people have placed him as the sole creator of the company. This is not the case at all, and behind the smiling man and almost true mascot of Marvel is a history filled with different versions of events. A lot of feuds and some clashes even more epic than the Avengers have taken on. But in the years before Marvel Comics were actually a thing, Stan Lee's journey to the company began with a life and career path that never had anything to do with comics at all. Like the setting of many comic books, Stan Lee grew up in New York City, including areas like Washington Heights and the Bronx. Stan Lee's real name is actually Stanley Martin Lieber. He developed the nickname Stan Lee in high school and hasn't looked back since, even legally changing his name to Stan Lee in the years to follow. His father lost work during the Great Depression, giving Lee a deeper understanding of the privilege of working and doing work whenever you can. Lee's work ethic seemed to form at a very young age and didn't let up until his death this year. After graduating high school in the late 30s, Lee went right to work, following his passion for writing. His ultimate goal was to create an epic novel and begin his career as a successful author. His first job was far from writing novels. In fact, his first true writing gig started out writing obituaries of all things. He further pursued his interests with newspaper jobs and some work in local theaters. So how did Stan Lee get involved with the world of comic books? Well, it's all thanks to some family connections. Lee's uncle Robbie Solomon got him a job at a company known as Timely Comics, and Lee worked directly under his cousin's husband, Martin Goodman. Never heard of Timely Comics? Well, before Marvel Comics became the company name, Timely Comics provided the introduction to iconic superheroes like Captain America, Namor the Submariner, and the Human Torch. An original version, not a member of the Fantastic Four. So what did Stan Lee contribute to the creation of these heroes and side characters like Bucky? Well, nothing really. During his early days with Timely Comics, Lee was an assistant, providing writers with extra ink, running errands around the office, and completing random tasks as needed. Showcasing the work ethic inspired by his father, Lee eventually moved up in the ranks, getting more assignments and his own chance at creating a hero of his own. In 1941, the Timely Comics series Mystic debuted the character of the Destroyer. Much like Captain America, the Destroyer was a Nazi-fighting superhero, which was injected with a special serum that made him stronger and increased other abilities. Instead of Captain America's traditional red, white, and blue costume, the Destroyer dons a much darker design with a skull motif across his chest. The Destroyer saw mild success, but before Lee could expand and grow on his hero connections, he was entered into the Army in 1942. Was Lee fighting the front lines like his heroes in the Army? Not quite. He actually used his Army experience to expand on his writing skills. The official role Lee served while in the military was known as a playwright, with much of his work involving training manuals and instructional films. By the time Lee returned from the Army, the comic book industry wasn't doing so well. People didn't really take comics seriously, mostly aimed toward young children, and sales were plummeting, especially for Timely Comics, a company who lagged behind other industry giants like DC. Lee himself was even growing tired and disillusioned of the comic book industry, one he had only been in for just a few years. In the early 50s, Timely Comics focused on horror stories, cops and robbers, and ventured away from the prime superhero material they were known for. By copying other successful comics and looking for quick cash grabs, Lee and others at the company didn't have the same passion to write. A real-life tragedy at home also gave Lee a whole different perspective on the work he was doing. In 1953, Lee's wife gave birth to their second daughter, Jan Lee. 3 days after she was born, she passed away, an unbearable loss for any family to handle. Lee trudged on through the comic book industry, and in 1958, Timely Comics was ready to close their doors. This is when Lee received an assignment along with artist Jack Kirby. Their goal was to create a new superhero series, but one that focused on a group of heroes as opposed to just one. Drawing inspiration from the Justice League of America, Lee and Kirby collaborated to create the Fantastic Four. Back in the 1950s, superheroes were aimed at children 12 and younger, featuring cookie-cutter dialogue, simple stories, and little depth to the characters. Lee aimed for an older audience, looking to tap into older teens who sought out the excitement of comics but yearned for stories with a little bit more maturity. This is where the Fantastic Four came in. These heroes had problems. They bickered with each other. They dealt with things like breakups, inner demons, and accepting their roles as heroes. Art and dialogue featured content never seen before or even considered in a comic. Comics, once relegated as children's fodder, now had a chance to be taken more seriously. And with the launch of the Fantastic Four, Stan Lee and company could venture off and created more heroes, all in a shared universe. Timely Comics officially became Marvel Comics in 1961. Lee worked with many prominent comic book artists during this time, including Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko. Through their collaborations, Lee helped develop a process which would later be referred to as the Marvel Method. Instead of writing out a full script or story ahead of time, a basic outline or synopsis would be conceived and handed off to the artist to fill in panels. Once the art was complete, text bubbles and dialogue would then get added as needed. The creative process allowed for much faster production and collaboration among artists. Back during these days, the comic world was like the Wild West, and specific credits were a little muddled, especially when using the Marvel Method. Whether Lee wrote just the synopsis, a majority of the dialogue, or a mix of both, he was often credited as the sole writer, while someone like Jack Kirby would be credited as the artist. These credits brought on a lot of contention and debates over the years. Even though they were making successful content, a rift was eventually formed between Lee and his co-workers. Despite the arguments over proper credit for writing and stories, you could not deny the success of Marvel, and Lee's hand in creating some of the most iconic heroes of all time. Following the Fantastic Four came the Incredible Hulk in 1962. During that same year, Lee and Kirby worked with Larry Lieber to develop Thor, the God of Thunder, based on mythology, and not so much of an original creation. Fans loved it, and they wanted more. In a very similar way that Marvel Studios has rolled out the MCU in recent years, Marvel Comics was steamrolling through hero introductions and filling up newspaper stands with all types of heroes. In 1963, Lee and Lieber collaborated again to create Iron Man. The hero looked vastly different than his modern-day counterpart and wasn't nearly the success that Robert Downey Jr. has made him, but was still a significant addition. After debuting in the Marvel series Tales of Suspense, it took nearly 5 years before the hero even got his own solo series. And if you thought the formation of the Fantastic Four in a single comic was impressive, then imagine the work it took to lay out the formation of the X-Men, which debuted in 1963. The original X-Men were much different than we know today. Wolverine didn't even debut until 1975. Instead, the original lineup included characters like Cyclops, Beast, Angel, Iceman, and a Marvel Girl, aka Jean Grey. The X-Men was another collaboration between Jack Kirby and Stan Lee, furthering their impressive comic book resume. As if these heroes were not enough, the biggest Stan Lee creation would come in 1962, when he collaborated with Steve Ditko to create the Amazing Spider-Man. The spandex costume design and young age of Peter Parker really stood out from the other heroes, and people flocked to purchase issues of the comic. In 1963, The Amazing Spider-Man received his own solo series, and eventually led to the creation of some of the most iconic and well-known characters in the Marvel Universe. With Lee creating an expanded universe at Marvel, it was time to bring these heroes together, and they wasted no time in doing so. Thus, the Avengers were born. Once again teaming with Jack Kirby in production, heroes like Ant-Man, Thor, Iron Man, the Hulk, and Wasp were all teamed up together and dubbed as Earth's mightiest heroes. The crossover effect worked. Heroes could randomly pop up in other comics, and the Marvel publication universe was going strong. Beyond the iconic heroes we all know and love today, Lee knew how to get to the true heart of his readers and connect with them like no other comic could. After the adventures of Spider-Man, Thor, or the Hulk would end, each issue of Marvel Comics would feature letters to the editor, chosen and responded to by Stan Lee himself. And this is where Lee truly thrived. He had the ability to reach readers, understand their questions, and respond to them like a friend. In those letters, he would write back casually, offer advice, and come across as a mentor. No problem was too small, and Lee's gracious attitude really came across on the page. He brilliantly used those small sections of the comics to build the greatest character of all, himself. Illustrations of Lee would start building his brand, along with ending each letter with his catchphrase, Excelsior. Because of Lee's brand building and personal response with fans, he quickly became the face of Marvel, and in many ways remains the face of Marvel today. Because of his natural ability to promote and woo audiences, other creators like Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko were cast in the shadows, and the resentment grew because of it. While Lee put in his work and creative forces behind many iconic heroes, credit was not spread around like it should have been. In the years following the major success of Marvel's early days, Kirby and Ditko have both spoke out against Lee and his contributions to the heroes. Nevertheless, Lee forged on, continuing to grow Marvel's brand as much as possible, and promoting became almost a full-time job for Lee. He not only created a diverse group of heroes, but helped forge diversity through the characters and storytelling. The Black Panther was introduced in the Fantastic Four in 1966, before joining the Avengers and eventually getting his own solo comic book series, marking the first African-American character in mainstream comics. Lee also used Spider-Man's mantle to tell an anti-drug use storyline in 1971. He realized that the message delivered by comic books went beyond entertainment and could actually resonate with children. Even though Lee was at the head of Marvel, the comics he helped develop and create were kind of running away from him. Starting in the 70s, comics were getting even grittier and more violent, especially as the young teenage fans grew up into young adults. Violence increased. Characters would get killed off, and the bright palettes of panels were often replaced with darker tones and visuals. Even for Lee's friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. As a writer, Lee was turning into more of a relic than the hot new thing, but the marketing genius had plenty of ways to keep himself fresh in the mind of fans. Making a move from New York to California, Lee saw the major potential of film and TV adaptations of some of his best creations. He spearheaded many projects while still working as the main publisher with Marvel, and long before the MCU began Lee's wide world of cameos. The Stan Lee is now synonymous with cameo, and it was a smart and calculated move Lee used before the man even became so recognizable. Before he was shown on screen, Lee used his voice to serve as the narrator for both the live-action Incredible Hulk and the animated show Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. Those shows both aired in the early 1980s, and Lee's first on-screen cameo would come as a jury foreman for the 1989 TV movie entitled The Trial of the Incredible Hulk. Oddly enough, his second cameo came during a Spider-Man crossover episode with the animated Muppet Babies. Stan Lee appeared during a live-action segment where the Muppet Babies shot webs at him through the panels of the comic, kicking off the comedic nature many of his cameos have taken on over the years. One of the more memorable cameos in the early 90s was not actually in a Marvel movie, but rather Kevin Smith's Mallrats. Smith was a huge comic book nerd who has gone on to direct episode of TV's Flash and write for various comic book series. Stan Lee plays himself in the film and is treated like comic book royalty by the creators on screen. Just as Lee's face, personality, and character were getting known to mainstream comic book fans, the Marvel genius was slowly getting pushed out of the company. Roles had changed over the years. New faces were coming in, and Lee was essentially getting paid over $1 million a year just for his history with the company. He was still writing the odd comic here or there, but it was now more likely to see Stan Lee's name in the credits of a Marvel film rather than on the front cover of the comic books. So was the reign of Stan Lee over? Stan Lee may have been out of the Marvel company, but his creative nature could not be stopped. Using his name and celebrity in the comic book world, Lee formed the Stan Lee Media Company in 1998. The company seemed to be off to a fast start by gaining the right to Conan the Barbarian, but nothing else really took off. The company focused a lot on digital media, with a new hero team, the Seventh Portal, premiering through a season of webisodes. The financial misdeeds of Stan Lee Media didn't stop Lee from pursuing more entertainment options. After leaving the company, he started over fresh with POW Entertainment. Through this company, Lee created books, TV shows, movies, and plenty of international content. Ever the hype man, Lee promoted projects all the time, especially at comic conventions. Some of his various productions included comic mascots based off of every NHL team, a reality show on the History Channel entitled Stan Lee's Superhumans, and a YouTube channel entitled Stan Lee's World of Heroes. Lee was able to venture out beyond just comics, understanding how new generations enjoy all different types of media. Despite Lee's passing, POW Entertainment will continue to produce content and expand on Lee's creations with the company. One of the biggest changes to Stan Lee's legacy came with the release of X-Men in the year 2000. Lee saw the success of X-Men and 2002's Spider-Man and tried to fight to get royalties. While Marvel eventually settled with Lee and paid him a pretty hefty one-time lump fee, Lee missed out on a chance to earn a massive fortune with the launch of the MCU in 2008. The MCU completely changed Marvel, and the sale to Disney launched the comic books to whole new heights. While Lee was given cameo roles in all the MCU films, his royalty check could have been much bigger if a better agreement was made. Obviously, Lee's grudge with the payments wasn't big enough to keep him out of those movies. The early 2000s also marked a time when Lee's life was celebrated with some pretty honorable awards. In 2002, he won the Saturn Award for Life Career. In 2011, he received his own star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. In 2012, he won the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Visual Effects Society Awards. In 2017, Lee was inducted along with his collaboration partner Jack Kirby into the Disney Legends Hall of Fame. These awards were just the icing on the cake for Lee. They were all well-deserved, and Lee continued to do active work well into his 90s. Like anyone over the age of 75, there are numerous health problems to consider. In early 2018, Lee had nurses with him nearly 24 hours a day, and especially when he traveled. He was firmly dedicated to his cameo roles, but had to limit travels to just California as long-distance travel became tough. To make matters worse, in 2017, his wife Joan passed away after complications from a stroke. They were married for 69 years, and the loss was obviously heartbreaking for Lee. Rumors also sprung up about healthcare abuse and a strained relationship with his daughter. Even with all of the drama, health problems, and sad passing of his wife, Lee kept a happy face in public, amid the few appearances he did make. Sadly, Stan Lee passed away at the age of 95 on November 12, 2018. The cause of death was most likely due to health complications from pneumonia, something he battled for a lot of 2018 and led to his deteriorating health. The comic book world quickly mourned and celebrated the life of Stan Lee. Not only did countless fans share memories about Lee, but so did many celebrities whose lives were impacted by him. One of the biggest examples comes from the original Avengers actors like Chris Evans, Chris Hemsworth, Robert Downey Jr., Scarlett Johansson, and Jeremy Renner. They took out a full page in The Hollywood Reporter, dedicated to Lee. DC Comics may be one of Marvel's biggest rivals, but they also paid their respect in multiple ways. A real-life Superman statue in Metropolis, Illinois was adorned with a black armband to honor Lee, and we imagine more dedications in the form of print will be on the way. His final 2 cameos were filmed for 2 Marvel productions, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse and The Avengers 4. The Avengers 4 cameo is a great way to go out, although you know future MCU movies will find ways to sneak the likeness of Lee in using statues, paintings, and other creative Easter eggs. No matter how you feel about Lee's past or the disputes about his writing credits, he was there for all of it. He transitioned Timely Comics into Marvel Comics. He helped develop the web-slinger Spider-Man, and he truly entertained millions of people over the years. Even after his passing, the people Lee will reach and impact will only expand as Marvel Comics continues to grow and the MCU has movie and television release plans well past 2020. Even more than the fans are the thousands upon thousands of people Lee has offered the opportunity to have employment for. In the early days, there were writers, assistants, artists, marketing, interns, and all other sorts of positions at Marvel Comics. As the industry grew and ventured into film, we have Lee to thank for the film crew crews, screenwriters, set designers, costume designers, and actors hired for various roles over the years. Just like the work ethic Lee's own father instilled in him by going through the Great Depression, he has passed it on through a countless amount of people. Stan Lee's legacy will live on forever, thanks to the world and heroes he created. Similar to authors like Mark Twain or Stephen King, Stan Lee's name will forever be associated with the world of publishing. Generations from now, the name Stan Lee will conjure up images of the Marvel logo, his endless amount of cameos, and the iconic heroes he had a part in creating. What's your favorite memory of Stan Lee? What's your favorite cameo appearance? How should Marvel honor him in the future? Let us know in the comments section below. Don't forget to like this video, share it, and subscribe to ScreenRant on YouTube so you can stay up to date with our awesome videos. Thanks for watching.